You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're joining me on my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And you can listen to the audio stream on the radio wherever you'd like to. Go over to Odyssey Radio, that's ODYSY1.com, to see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. Or you can join me over on my simulcast in video on my YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts or Mr. Scotty Roberts. They both work and they both get you to the same place. You can join the benefit of watching the simulcast while you listen on Odyssey Radio is that you can join the chat room, the live chat room, and join the other Intrepids over there. Put your input into the show, talk with other people of like mind or of different mind. You can debate over there if you'd like. A lot of good stuff, fun stuff happens with the Intrepid family over on my YouTube channel. And while you're there, subscribe. Hit the like button, the little bell for announcements and so on. And you can always get announcements when this show goes live. And, I almost didn't make it through that announcement section this morning, that introduction. It's either my mouth is moving too fast for my brain, or my brain is just too slow tonight. I don't know what it is. So let's get into what we want to talk about. You know, but before I do, I want to ask you one question. Remember, I don't do a lot of politics on this show, and I try to steer clear of it. I'll talk a little more on Sundays because that's not my official radio show. It's just my live stream. But I have one single question that keeps plaguing me, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, what end of the political spectrum you are. A question came to my mind, and this morning I put it into my social media, my Facebook, as a post, just to see what kind of responses I would get, and there were many and varied. But I asked this question: if the United States economy and jobs is so bad under President Trump as the Democrats and even former President Obama would have you believe, all this stuff coming out that Trump inherited Obama and so on, why is it so bad if Trump inherited it from Obama? Is the left telling us that Obama really screwed up our economy, and that is what Trump? Because everybody on the left says the economy isn't as good as President Trump says it is. And on the other hand, they're saying, but he inherited anything good from Obama. So he either inherited it from Obama or he didn't. There's the big question. I made it a much simpler question than it came out there, but think about that for a minute. You keep hearing all the criticism, and even the former president will tell you that whatever Trump is experiencing now, he has inherited from him. And yet, the left is also telling you that our economy is much more abysmal than anybody said. So is the left actually inadvertently admitting that Obama's economy was horrible? Or perhaps President Trump is doing some good things with the economy? There's a question. Politics for the day are done. Think about that. That's a question I wondered about this morning, so I posted that. See what you think about that. If you're on my Facebook page and you hadn't seen that, go ahead and go over there and give me your answer. Or go over to the chat room and type it in there. That would be fine too. You know, last night we talked about the paranormal. And just by way of introducing, I want to do a few shows this week on the paranormal. And because, you know, I'm deeply involved in that myself. I have for over 20 years. I have been involved in doing paranormal research of one form or another. Now, it started as a curiosity for me when I was a kid. I mean, everybody said, how'd you get your start in the paranormal? Well, it started with being curious about it. First of all, being terrified of it. And what really made that happen was, well, first of all, I was absolutely terrified of the dark when I was a kid. I wouldn't go out in the dark if, without a flashlight. I was scared of the dark. But much of that came from the psychological conditioning I got from movies and television. And when I was a kid, we had the old classic monsters of Hollywood. You know, we had Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, all of these kinds of monsters and variations of that. Because when I was a child, I was born in 1960, so by the time 1970 hit, I had been well conditioned by the old movie monsters and the shows that started rising up in the 60s. And then in the 70s, we had Kolchak, the Night Stalker, came on. That was a great show, and that was really kind of the predecessor to what became the X-Files when I was an adult. And so all of those things kind of conditioned me at a very early age, and I became very interested in what was out there. I became very spiritual, very religiously minded. I became a born-again Christian. And, of course, ghosts were supposed to be that taboo thing, that thing you didn't get into. There's only one ghost, and that's the Holy Ghost. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit. And ghosts were taboo. But what we weren't told and really taught was, yeah, they're real, just stay away from them, is the way it came out a little later. And so the older I got, the more I found that the paranormal didn't always match up with what we were taught evangelically or religiously in the religious circles where I was, the church I was part of. And I found inconsistencies. And I started asking the question, of course you have your experiences and you see things and you do things, but then all of a sudden you're told, well, that's just psychological. That's your mind. Your mind is telling you to believe something. We have these innate needs, these innate fears that are fed by the imaginary things that we bring in, and that there's a great psychological reason for it, a subconscious reason for it. And so I started looking into that, and I thought, the experiences I have had aren't really built on wild emotion. They aren't really built on needing to see something. They're built on curiosity, on wanting to know, wanting to have answers to things. And so my experience with the paranormal wasn't one, I've had emotional experiences that have been attached to paranormal experiences, but those emotions are usually as a product of experiencing something. Yesterday I talked about the visions I had. And those things, the emotion, the deep emotion I felt, was the result of, the product of, the sum of that experience. It was not the thing that drove the experience. So being in Egypt for the first time and having that vision at the stepped pyramid of Djoser in the Hebsed Court, the ruins there, I'm sitting in the sun, having a cigarette and just loving the fact, soaking up the fact that I'm there. And the history, the archaeology. As a matter of fact, I got to tell you, I'm going to rabbit trail just a bit here. I had a dream a few nights before I left for Egypt the very first time. And it was my good friend John Ward, who is a British archaeologist working in Egypt, living in Luxor, that invited me over, and we spent a month researching a book that we were going to be writing for New Page Books. And that's the Exodus Reality. And I've talked about that one before. But I had a dream a few nights before I left for the trip for Egypt for the first time. And that dream consisted of John and I. We were kind of walking in the Egyptian desert. And we came upon these ruins. And these ruins were like a big block, crumbly block building of some kind, like an old temple or something. And we, as we're examining the boulder or the cut stone, we're noticing that there's actually a door there. And we put our fingers in and we pry open this block, which moved a big door, and we walked inside. And we were in a gift shop. It was like glass lined and mirrors and marble and all of this stuff, and all kinds of modern merchandise, books and toys and postcards and coffee mugs and all that all over the shelves there. And so we walked into this big gift shop. And then I woke up. So that dream, psychologically, what did that mean? Did I view going to Egypt as a great gift? Did I view, what was it? That the ruins are all there, but there's more to be found if you can get inside? I don't know what the exact psychological impact or meaning of that dream was, but I was excited to go. So there I was sitting in the Hebsed court, and I was just glad to be there, just taking a break, sitting in the sun, having a cigarette, and soaking up the fact that my feet were in the sand in Egypt. And then I had this vision, and it had great emotion attached to it. And so this is the big question. When we have paranormal experiences, maybe many of those are driven by our psychological needs. Maybe there is psychology behind it. Michael Shermer, really the head skeptic, you could say, in the country for skeptic. I can't even think of the organization, American Skeptics or Skeptics of America or something like that. And he wrote several books on skepticism with a skeptical view to things. And one was called Why Good People Believe Weird Things. I believe that was the full title. And or Why People Believe in Weird Things, or Why Good People Believe. It's one of those two. And in that book, he, of course, examines why good people experience the unexplained and the weird. And, of course, he was really relying heavily on psychology to prove that this is why people believe weird things. They're not really experiencing real ghosts or real paranormal activity, but they're experiencing things that their mind are making up for one psychological reason or another. And still, I would look at that and I would say, as I mentioned, I had a good skeptic friend of mine who I've known for 30 years, a good friend, and he had once told me that, well, you only saw a ghost or see ghosts because you want to see them, or it's late at night and you're tired. And I asked him, I said, for all the years you've known me, he told this to me about 10 years ago. I said, you've known me for 20 years or so. I said, do I come across to you ever as somebody who needs to see a ghost so bad that I will subconsciously or psychologically create that thing? I said, or do I come across to you as a fake, somebody who's making shit up? And he had to concede on both points that he saw me as a fairly pragmatic thinker, a solid critical thinker, and he said, well, maybe in your case, no. I said, so what do we do with the information that I give you? That I said, I saw this, I experienced this, and so on. And he had no answer for that. He says, I really can't answer that for you. And so I seemed to defy his explanation for why people see weird things or experience weird things. And so the answers, the pet answers of the skeptic, didn't work. So I want to ask you, what are the reasons, do you think, that people see ghosts? Is it all psychological? Is it all made up? Is it all manufactured in our subconscious? Our subconsciouses? Or is it real? Are there real things out there? Is the big question. Or are we alone and there is nothing beyond the natural, the normal, the scientifically explained that exists? We just create that in our heads. And in the vast universe, there is nothing more than what we can describe or explain by the scientific method. And that is the big question that we have to ask. And I started looking online to find information. I wanted to look for psychological reasons why people believe things. I wanted to find psychological. Was there any psychology out there that could say, yes, there are things that we can actually experience, or is it all chalked up to just people believing weird things? And I looked in vain and could not find a whole lot. I've got 5 to 8 different articles that are open here on my computer as I was digging for this stuff. And I find everything from, can ghosts exist? And every time I seem to find a good article on something, it was against or the opposite of saying that these things could be real, and they're usually associated with, it's Halloween time, let's examine this. So people always line up ghosts with Halloween and so on. Even in the psychological world, I saw an article on how the God you worship affects the ghosts you see. Are we visited by tormented souls or by sinister demons, was his subtitle. And I'm going to pull some information from that one. But then there's another article. Why do people believe weird things? Our faith in the supernatural is perfectly natural, says Lawrence Samuel, a PhD. And I've also got another one. What's the allure of paranormal in our scientific age? Many misunderstand science, and see more meaning in an imagined paranormal world. It's the subtitle. It's by Ralph Lewis, MD. And it's all about finding purpose was his main goal with that. So I want to look at a few things here. I want to give you an idea of what's being said out there in the psychological world. And I want you to consider this. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer here, is that while I believe in good psychology, and I believe, frankly, in a lot of what's said in these articles, I do not think that because the mind can create things, because people react emotionally to things, because there are reasons that people create paranormal happenstances in their lives out of their mind, that does not negate the reality of the paranormal. Because I think you can look at the paranormal from a psychological point of view, and you can draw these answers. You can say, people believe weird things. And there are reasons for it. Many times these psychologists or these psychological folk, they don't give any credence to the fact that there might be something real that people are experiencing. But I do want to address one thing, is something I've noticed when you get into the strange and the weird and the paranormal, the unexplained, the people that seem to inhabit those communities. Now, a lot of you are listening, so don't take offense at this. Hear me out and hear out my reasons, because I'm going to say something that might seem inflammatory to you or denigrating. Don't take it that way, because we're going somewhere with this. The people in those communities are generally oddball people. They are people that are the misfits in society. You don't see a lot of captains of industry and people in business that are participating in the paranormal, although they're there. I'm a prime example of that. Good friends of mine I have are prime examples of that. But overall, you will find that people who join the paranormal groups, go ghost hunting, do all of that, they're all kind of on the fringes of certain things in society. And they're in a different group. They're like carnies or festies, what we call Renaissance Festival people. They're people who have beliefs that are different than the church or any kind of staid belief system. There's a lot of pagans that are involved. And overall, you can almost take that group all together and say, people in general out there tend to look at those people as being a little weird. And so we're the weirdos, we're the misfits, we're the ones that don't believe the things we ought to believe. And we're kind of locked into our own way of seeing things. And so I want to look at a couple of things here. And let's cover this. The first one that I think I want to address, I have this article by Lawrence Samuel, PhD, up in front of me here, and he asks why, or tries to explain why people believe weird things. And why is there the weird? Why do we believe things that are oddball? Why are we in that kind of the outskirts, the outliers of society? Because we believe strange things. There are psychologists, there's sociologists, there's anthropologists. They've all come forward with theories to explain, as Michael Shermer, which I told you about, the head of the Skeptical Society, I don't even know the name of his group, Skeptics of America, let's call it that. Somebody can correct me in the chat room. Michael Shermer expressed it as the title of a book, Why Do People Believe Weird Things? Shermer is a leading non-believer of the supernatural, and it takes the traditional skeptical view grounded in psychology, filled with uncertainty life can offer, and it can be frightening, leading many to gravitate to what Shermer considered to be pseudoscience, superstition, and all these other confusions of our time, he refers to them as. Belief in an afterlife or some kind of grand design is comforting and assuring to people. It provides order to people's universes. That's what they like to think. There's something beyond this. We can't live, if a natural life, 70 to 100 years old, and that's it. Poof, we're gone. There's got to be something more, is what we're being told by psychologists and anthropologists and so on, is the reason people need to create the paranormal. Mythologies, religions, the occult, these all have roots in the pre-scientific age. And Shermer pointed out in his book that these kinds of beliefs forged before reason and rationalism, and they dominated intellectual discourse. And the faith in some kind of God or some kind of spiritual plane of existence laid the foundation for today's popularity in, now you don't hear this term very much anymore, but ESP. I think there was a television program back in the early 70s called The Sixth Sense, and I can't remember who was in that, but The Sixth Sense dealt with the ESP. Back in the early 70s, that was a big thing. Oh, ESP, that's interesting. What is that? People want to know. UFOs, ghosts, all of these things are very popular today, according to Shermer, because people need to have something to believe in. And he argued that any phenomenon outside the rigid boundaries of science are more alluring and perhaps an irresistible proposition for a lot of weirdos like us that are curious about things and think there's got to be something more. And of course, Michael Shermer is also an atheist. I don't care that he's an atheist. If you want to be an atheist, be an atheist. That's between you and God. I'm an atheist and God knows it. Kind of thinking. But if that's what you are, if you're an atheist, many times you're not going to believe in a lot of this other stuff. And they just seem to kind of go hand in hand. And now there was another approach through more a sociological lens to all of this. There was a woman named Wendy Kaminer, and she wrote a book called Sleeping with Extraterrestrials. Our obsession with the supernatural is a product of our evangelical culture, she said, and a confessional society. There's a belief in everything from guardian angels to past lives, and that reflects our emphasis on feelings and emotions. In other words, thinking with our hearts rather than our heads. And now, I'll have to tell you, I'm a huge proponent of thinking with our head. And a lot of guys out there, guys as opposed to women, women tend to think more emotionally, men tend to think more with their heads. You've heard the emotion versus the logic argument, and that's a generalization. There might be some women now, even in the chat room, you might bristle and say, I think logically. Well, physiologically, we're a little different than that. And why are women more nurturing as mothers? Why do women make better mothers than men on that nurturing level? Because men aren't built that way and women are. It's the way we're wired. So let's leave that for another discussion. But so we think with our hearts rather than our heads when we're in the paranormal or the spiritual or the religious, according to this. The New Age movement, other expressions of magical thinking, offer this psychic comfort and community. This woman wrote in her book, Kaminer. And there's a conviction that we ourselves are somehow divine. Faith reveals what reason can't discern, she wrote. You get that? This is what people think of people who believe in ghosts, the paranormal, spirituality, the divine. That faith in something reveals what reason can't discern for these people. our common attraction to mystery and the fantastic, providing a strong sense of belonging. This is why people believe weird things, according to her. And so, you know what? We're already on top of the end of the first half of this show. So I want to dig into this some more. I want to look at this some more. And you start thinking about this. We got to go out for 2 minutes. We'll be back in 2 minutes. So hang tight. Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Thanks for sitting there, holding on during the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid Radio Program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And that's at odysy1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. You can also hear the simulcast of this show and watch it in video over on my YouTube stream. And that channel is Mr. Scotty Roberts. YouTube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, or just Scotty Roberts. They'll both get you to the same place. Come on over, join the already very active chat room that's live with this show, and join the Intrepid family over there. Give us your input, and let's move on with this right now. We're talking about the psychology of belief. Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe that there is a Bigfoot? Do you believe in UFOs, alien contact? Do you believe in all these different psychic mediumship? Do you believe people can talk to the dead? Do you believe that there's a life after death or a life after life? Do you believe any of this stuff exists? Well, according to science and psychology, you are believing weird things when you believe that. And you are really part of a segment of society that dwells and bases their their life structure and their life belief system on emotions. You're somebody who, in essence, would rather believe something on an emotional level because you really can't discern the truth and the facts on a scientific level. This is what we're being told. Anthropologists have good reasons why we believe. Evolution has conditioned us to believe things are alive when we're not quite sure. Some suggest it being a far better survival strategy to assume that the big brown formation over yonder is a hungry bear, not just a rock in the shadowy darkness. And thinking that the thing that just went bump in the night is a ghost instead of a rusty pipe in the house could very well be instinctual. It's something, it's one more reason that it should not be surprising that the supernatural is often accepted as the truth. And I will tell you, some of that I agree with. Most of that I agree with. When we have, if you remember my show last night, my little girl said she saw a ghost in the house. And she sees lots of things. Now, she also likes to watch a lot of TV that focuses on scary things and the paranormal and so on. But she said she saw a woman with long hair covering her face, wearing a red dress, moving quickly in the hallway 2 nights ago. And so she told us that on the show yesterday. So the big question is this: did she really see that, or was her mind engineered by evolution to see things like that? In the absence of perceived control, people become susceptible to detecting patterns in an effort to regain some sense of organization. It's a fancy way of saying that the mind actively looks for explanations of things. There's anxiety or economic distress might make people much more interested in feeling a sense of control. Whatever's going on in my daughter's life, a young mind of 8, just learning things and curious about the world around her. And then she sees television shows that explore ghosts and things like that. And so she latches onto that. Is this perfectly in sync with the consistent spike in the paranormalization experienced through tough times or social political turmoil? People in distress see more ghosts and things like that. So perceptually, the world is chronically ambiguous, and it requires an interpretation. It was Stuart Guthrie, the professor emeritus of anthropology at Fordham University and author of Faces in the Clouds, that says that this accounting for everything from the Virgin Mary and the burrito phenomenon to the peak experience Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell reported while in space in 1971. John F. Shoemaker, author of Wings of Illusion, echoed this anthropological view. Magic, religion, and all forms of reality distortion are simply species-specific responses unique to the human animal. This is an anthropological explanation for why we see ghosts and believe in gods and all these different paranormal types of things. He argued that an adaptive technique making us feel more secure and protected is what we encounter when we see these things. Any amplified state of consciousness helps humans deal with the not very appealing idea that life is chaos followed by oblivion, which is basically what science tells us. Life is chaos followed by nothing, by oblivion. So normal intelligence is simply not enough. This line of thinking goes with humans capable of suspending reason and logic in order to construct different kinds of mythologies, creating the illusion and escaping reality provides self-worth to people. Meaningfulness, power, functioning as a kind of counterintelligence. Suggestively, this is the most fascinating of all human characteristics, some psychologists will tell you, psychiatrists and scientific people that study the brain. And a way we were different from all the other forms of of life on the earth, humans. And so do you buy that argument? Do you buy that we are simply the product of evolution, that the things we see and experience by way of ghosts? Now, I've heard a lot of ghost stories in my life, and a lot of those you can link to people wanting to see somebody who's gone on before them. Grief, emotion, and things like that. But what about the people that don't really know that much about it, or don't really have a need to see something different. They don't have a need on the emotional scale to see that, and they experience these things. Now, very interestingly enough, and I didn't call up the actual account of this where he wrote about it, but Michael Shermer himself. You know what? I might just call this up while we're talking here. Michael Shermer, Ghost Encounter. Now, a couple of years ago, Michael Shermer, the head of the Skeptic Society, he is somebody who had his own, and I want to see if it's up in here, his own experience. And I don't see it coming up in the top 10. Let's see, I'm going to put Michael Shermer Paranormal Encounter. Now, I don't have this up in front of me because I didn't think to look it up ahead of time. But I want to see if it's in here. He's often asked if he's ever encountered something, might call supernatural. Why do people believe weird things? Why do people believe ghosts? Michael Shermer, Skeptic Tags. Let's see. Oh, I'm not seeing it here. I'd have to do a little search, and maybe we'll find it for tomorrow's show. But I heard him talk about this, and I read an article about it, where Michael Shermer had an experience. Something about he was getting married, and I believe his father had passed on, or his grandfather, or somebody, and he was getting married, and an old radio, I think, of his father's, I think that's what it was, started playing, and he never turned it on. And it was playing a tune that both he and his fiance, if I remember the story correctly, their favorite tune. And that turned on and started playing. And Michael Shermer himself got the chills, and he said, this is something that I wasn't expecting. And to him, it was a paranormal experience. It was outside the realm of what he could explain as having happened. And a lot of people came out and said, look, even Michael Shermer had an experience. And we thought this was going to change him a bit in the way he perceived things. We'll look into it. Maybe I'll bring that up again tomorrow because I didn't prepare that for tonight's show. But I find very interesting this whole idea that all of science seems to want to have us understand the paranormal as being something our brain creates, as opposed to something that is external to us that we experience. There was somebody who wrote this interesting article on how the ghosts we see line up with the religion we follow, or the gods that we worshipped. If you've ever seen a ghost, you have something in common with 18% of Americans. As a matter of fact, that makes me think of something I prepared that I do want to show you. Those of you who are listening by radio, you can't see this because it's a graphic that I'm showing over on the video YouTube channel. But folks, take a look at this little infographic here. Do you believe? It says, and this is all about beliefs that Americans have, and we're talking about the United States of America, so Americans. It says here that 71% have had a paranormal experience. So with that paranormal experience, a lot of things fall under that category. So the question is, if you had a paranormal experience, are 71% of people in the United States given to psychological or evolutionary anthropological workings of the brain, as opposed to something that's external? I would dare say, I would love to see that broken down, that number, but I would dare say a lot of that 71%, you're going to have a lot of people who think they've seen something who maybe haven't, that fall into that category of psychological or anthropological or evolutionary. But let's get back and look at this chart again. So 71% have had a paranormal experience. 34% believe in the existence of ghosts. That's 1/3 of our country, a little bit more then 1/3 of Americans believe that ghosts exist. 56% of the country believes ghosts are spirits of the dead. And that breaks down. You can see here, spirits of the dead are 56%. Energy imprints, 23% of our society. Other dimensions, 10%. No such thing as ghosts, 7%. Demons, 2% believe that. That's the Baptists. And hallucinations, 2%. That's the scientists. So, and I'm being a little facetious there, but 56% of people believe that ghosts are spirits of the dead. 41% of Americans believe in extrasensory perception, or ESP. That's the sixth sense thing, intuition, psychic activity, so on. 37% of people in America believe that houses can be haunted, places, physical places. 65% believe Ouija boards are dangerous. Yes, no, goodbye. Now, there were some other findings in this little study. It talks about how 55% of Americans believe in psychic or spiritual healing or the power of the human mind to heal the body. 17% aren't sure. 26% don't believe. I'm going to rush through this so I don't use up all our time just going through this chart. I just think this is an interesting little study. There are 42% of Americans that believe people on this earth are sometimes possessed by the devil. Follow me! There are 21% people that can communicate mentally with someone who's died. So we're talking psychic mediums. I see dead people. There are 21% of Americans are witches. 20% believe in reincarnation, the rebirth of the soul in a new body after death. And 9% believe channeling allows a person, or allows a spirit being to temporarily assume control of the body. Now, this is About.com, Gallup poll, and Associated Press were all part of this study that put all of this information together. So I may post that chart up over on, and I don't make reference very much because I haven't really updated the website very much, but intrepidradio.com. You can go there and see more about this show. Well, not really. I'm telling you more today about the show than I've got information up on my site, which needs desperate state of rebuilding needs to take place there. So it says here that psychologists or the psychological community believes that there are 18% of Americans that believe that say they've seen a ghost. Now, we know there's a lot more than that, 56% according to that, all those different studies put together. And while there's evidence that our brains are hardwired to see ghosts, the apparitions we see can be really quite diverse. They take many different shapes. Historians who study and catalog ghostly encounters all across time, they're going to be people that'll tell you that ghosts come in a range of shapes and forms. Some haunt individuals, appearing in dreams, popping up at unexpected times. Others haunt a specific location and are prepared to spook anyone who happens to pass by. Hoo, boo. And some are the spitting images of what we were once living and breathing humans. And then there are the noisy and troublesome poltergeists, which appear as uncontrollable supernatural forces instead of people. And so what might explain such discrepancies and these differences and all these different kind of beings that we can see, what explains that? And why are some people much more likely to see ghosts than other people? There are people, my wife will pick things up long before I do. Is that psychic energy? Intuition? Is that the ability to see ghosts that I don't have? I don't know what the word for that is. So it turns out that for many of us, our religious background, our spiritual background might play a role in what we see. And so religion might ease one of our big fears. That's what religion does for people. Some have argued that religion evolved as this kind of terror management device. Now, I'm not talking just spirituality. I'm talking about religion, organized, more or less organized religion. It was a terror management device, a handy way to remove the uncertainty surrounding one of the scariest things we can imagine, and that would be our deaths. And in ancient times, this is what we did to cope with that. We came up with a system of belief, a religion. And so almost every religion offers an explanation for what happens to us after we die, with the assurance that death isn't the end. And there is, in fact, evidence that very religious people don't fear death as much as other people. I was just talking to a good friend of mine from high school, Kent. We were the closest of friends all through high school. He was a year ahead of me, and he went off to college a year, and I followed, went to the same college he did. We were roommates there. We have kept in touch over the years as friends. And I just talked to him on the phone 40 years after the fact, just the other day, and we were catching up. And his dad just died, and I knew his parents, and he wanted me to drop a little pendant for him that he wants to have engraved. And this little pendant, it has a picture of Pilgrim from Pilgrim's Progress as he's approaching the celestial city. And John Bunyan wrote this, Pilgrim's Progress. You can look it up, an old allegorical tale on Christianity. And my friend Kent told me that one of the last things his dad said to him when he went down to visit him out of state was as he was leaving, he gave his dad a big hug, and his dad knew he was going. And he said, "Son," he says, "I'll see you in the celestial city." And this was a line from Pilgrim's Progress. And so this is that faith that we have, that thing that we have, that belief system we have, that allows very religious, very spiritual people to maybe not fear death as much. He believed he's going on to the celestial city, and perhaps he has. So Protestants, Catholics, Muslims all believe in a day of resurrection and judgment in which our souls are directed to heaven. Or heaven, or Jannah in Islam. Or hell based upon our good deeds or misdeeds and during our time spent on earth. And Catholics also believe in this kind of halfway place, a stopping house, a roadhouse along the way called purgatory, in which people who aren't quite worthy of heaven yet, but are too good for hell, can pay their dues before getting a ticket to paradise. And I gotta say, theologically, we always had a problem with that in the Baptist church, because we said, well, if Christ paid for sin, why do I have to pay for anything if it was a free gift according to Scripture that was given to us by the deed of God's Son, doing something that humans could not do for themselves? So there was a contradiction there for me. Buddhists and Hindus believe in a cycle of death and reincarnation that can eventually result in a permanent spiritual state, provided you play your cards right over the successive lifetimes. Maybe you become Q from Star Trek. Even the Jewish faith, which doesn't really focus on the afterlife, assumes that an afterlife does exist. Bible talks about the bosom of Abraham, where the spirits of the dead go. And so by following a clear set of rules, worshipers can assert certain amounts of control. They know what they have to do to make good things happen, rather than bad things. And they make them happen to them after they take the big dirt nap. Death comes to all. What happens afterwards? And then the big question, are there tormented souls or sinister demons out there? This is the catch. Religion's talent for easing our anxiety about death may have had the perverse effect of increasing the likelihood that we'll be on edge about ghosts, spirits, all different other kinds of supernatural beings during our lifetime. This, however, may depend on how religious you actually are. all of the available evidence suggests that those who describe themselves as believers in something, a certain religion, but who don't attend church regularly, are twice as likely to believe in ghosts than those at the two extremes of religious belief, non-believers and the deeply devout at the different ends of that spectrum. And with most religions populated by an impressive cadre of prophets, gods, spirits, angels, and miracles, the tenets of religious faith shape what you see and what you experience. They could determine whether a visitor from the spirit world is a welcome or an unwelcome guest, while also influencing whom you think you're meeting. You see where this is going, where the psychological study goes, where science takes us? That this stuff probably isn't real, but it's things that we make up because of our religious experience, our spiritual experience, our mind, our evolution, our physiology. Here's a good example. In medieval Catholic Europe, ghosts were assumed to be the tormented souls of people suffering from their sins in purgatory. But during the Protestant Reformation, not long after, since most Protestants believed that souls went immediately to heaven or hell, paranormal activity was thought to be the work of angels or demons or other decidedly non-human supernatural beings. There was no such thing as a ghost. In the Baptist Church, we had hangings-on of that belief system because we always quoted the verse, absence with the body is presence with the Lord, for Christians. So if you were a non-Christian and you died, you're going to hell, but maybe your ghost could linger, and you shouldn't talk to them. That's all demonically driven and satanically driven. So while most Protestant sects today, sects, not sex, not whoopee time, I'm talking Protestant sects, S-E-C-T-S, today are largely silent about the existence of ghosts, Catholic theology remains amenable to the existence of ghosts. Catholics believe that you could have ghosts wandering around. They typically believe that God may permit dead individuals to visit their counterparts on earth. But curiously, the Church has traditionally condemned occult activities, such as seances and Ouija boards, and different forms of communicating with those dead spirits. Well, living spirits, but dead people. In some religions, such as voodoo, spirits and ghosts play this huge central role. Religions such as Buddhism and Hinduism support a belief in ghosts, but ghosts play only a minor role in the religion itself. For Hindus, ghosts are the souls of individuals who suffered a violent death, or of people who weren't accorded the appropriate and required death rituals. Buddhist ghosts are reincarnated individuals who may be trying to work through all their bad karma from their past lives. Muslims don't believe that dead people can return as ghosts. So if a Muslim thinks he's encountered a ghost, it's thought to be the work of jinn, the genies, the dark characters. And we've talked about them. I want to do a whole show on the jinn because they're very interesting characters. Jews typically discourage occult activities designed to contact the dead. Seems to be less consensus within Judaism as to the status of ghosts. But it appears that people across eras, religions, cultures have always been curious about a spiritual world that exists behind the curtain of death. And together, it really speaks to how thoughts, fears, visions of death are integral to human life. So, folks, I got to leave off there because there's so much. I didn't get to where I wanted to go with this. We will be picking this up in Friday's show tomorrow night. But you can see where psychology and science take us. Where do you take it? I happen to know that there is a psychological factor involved here, but I also know there is a physical factor here because I've encountered it. And I don't need to see this stuff so bad that I'm going to imagine something appearing before my face and talking to me, or touching me, or running its fingers through my hair, all of which have happened. So let's pick this up tomorrow night. Folks, you have a nice evening. Remember, sleep with the lights on tonight. But be mostly awake, aware, and in the now. Talk to you tomorrow. Good night.